They say children are precious, innocent, fragile things to be protected. They have never been more wrong. Children are mirrors. They reflect the chaos around them, the violence, the cracks in the souls of the people who made them. And when a child shatters in public, everyone sees exactly what kind of monster raised them. I learned this on a Tuesday night in November, when the most powerful man in the city walked into my restaurant with his 5-year-old son, and that child proceeded to destroy everything I'd worked for. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back 3 weeks earlier, to the moment my life became unrecognizable. I was 26 years old, working double shifts at Marcello's, an upscale Italian restaurant in the heart of downtown, where people who wore watches worth more than my annual salary came to be seen. I'd been waitressing there for 2 years, ever since I'd aged out of the foster system and realized that survival meant swallowing your pride and smiling at people who treated you like furniture. My name is Sophie Chen, and I was drowning. Not metaphorically, actually drowning. In debt, in exhaustion, in the suffocating weight of trying to stay alive in a city that ate people like me for breakfast. I owed $3,000 to a loan shark named Victor, who'd seemed reasonable when he'd offered to help with my nursing school tuition. That was before I'd learned what 20% interest compounded weekly actually meant. Before I'd seen the way his smile disappeared when I was late with a payment. I had 10 days to come up with the money. 10 days, or Victor had promised to do something he called recalculating our arrangement. The way he'd touched my wrist when he said it made my skin crawl for hours afterward. So I smiled at the customers. I memorized their orders. I laughed at jokes that weren't funny and pretended not to notice when hands lingered too long on my hip as I served dessert. That's what I was doing the first time I saw him. Alessandro Moretti. He didn't walk into rooms. He altered them. The air itself seemed to rearrange around him, molecules recognizing something apex, something dangerous. He was 34 years old, 6'3", with dark hair that fell just slightly too long over his collar, and gray eyes the color of winter storms. He wore a suit that cost more than my car, if I'd had a car, and moved with the careful control of someone who'd learned early that every gesture was a message. The restaurant went quiet when he entered. Not silent because that would be too obvious, but the quality of sound changed. Conversations became more careful, laughter more measured. Even the kitchen seemed to sense it, the usual chaos muting to something watchful. I knew who he was. Everyone did. Alessandro Moretti didn't just run businesses in this city. He owned it, in ways that had nothing to do with legal property deeds. The Moretti family had controlled the port, the unions, and half the politicians for 3 generations. They were the kind of power that made the law irrelevant. And he was looking at me. My manager, Frank, materialized at my elbow, sweating through his shirt despite the restaurant's aggressive air conditioning. "Sophie, Mr. Moretti's table. You're serving him tonight." It wasn't a question. I wanted to refuse. Every instinct I'd developed in 26 years of surviving dangerous situations screamed at me to find an excuse, to disappear into the bathroom until someone else took the table. But I needed this job, needed the tips, needed the $3,000 I didn't have. So I picked up my order pad and walked toward the table where Alessandro Moretti sat alone, his hands folded on the white tablecloth, his gray eyes tracking my approach like a predator watching prey. "Good evening," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I'd expected. "Can I start you with something to drink?" He studied me for a long moment, not the way men usually looked at me in this restaurant, that hungry, entitled assessment that made me feel like meat. This was different, surgical, like he was reading something written on my bones. "Whiskey," he said finally. His voice was low, controlled, with the faintest trace of an accent his family had never quite lost. "Macallan 25. Neat." I wrote it down even though I'd remember. "Any appetizers?" "No." He paused. "What's your name?" I wasn't supposed to give my real name. Frank had told us to use fake ones to maintain mystique or some bullshit like that. But something about the way Alessandro Moretti asked made lying feel dangerous. "Sophie. Sophie." He repeated it like he was testing the weight of it. "You're new." 2 years. That's new. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. "I would have noticed you before." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. I'd learned that silence was often safer than words. "Bring the whiskey," he said, and it was a dismissal. I brought the whiskey. I took his order, the osso buco, prepared exactly as the chef made it, no modifications. I refilled his water glass twice. I did my job with the same careful competence I brought to every table, and I tried not to think about the way his eyes followed me across the room. When he left, he placed $500 bills on the table. The meal had cost $80. Frank tried to take the money, claiming it was meant for the house, but I'd seen Alessandro Moretti's eyes on me when he left it. I'd seen the deliberateness of the gesture. That money was a message, though I didn't yet understand what it said. I took it. I paid Victor $500 that night, buying myself another week of breathing room. I didn't know I'd just sold something far more expensive than time. Alessandro Moretti came back the next night, and the night after that. Always alone, always at the same table, always requesting me specifically. He never said more than necessary, never touched me, never did anything that Frank could complain about. But his presence began to feel like a weight I carried, even when I wasn't at work. On the fourth night, he asked me a question. "Are you in trouble, Sophie?" I was refilling his wine glass. My hand didn't shake, but it wanted to. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." I had. And the fact that he'd noticed something was wrong, that he'd seen past the smile I wore like armor, terrified me more than Victor's threats. "I'm fine," I said. "You're lying." He said it without judgment, like he was commenting on the weather. "Someone's hurting you. I can see it." I stepped back from the table. "Your entree will be out in 5 minutes." I walked away before he could say anything else, my heart hammering against my ribs. In the bathroom, I stared at my reflection and wondered what he'd seen. The exhaustion I couldn't quite hide? The way I flinched when people moved too quickly? The desperate calculation behind every smile? When I brought his food, he didn't mention it again. But when he left, there was another $500 on the table, and beneath it, a business card with a phone number written in black ink. "Call me when you're ready to stop lying." I threw the card away. I kept the money. 3 days later, Victor found me in the alley behind my apartment building. It was 2 a.m. I'd just gotten home from a closing shift, so tired my bones ached, thinking about nothing except my bed. I didn't see him until his hand was on my arm, spinning me around, slamming me against the brick wall hard enough that my vision sparked. "You've been holding out on me, Sophie." His breath smelled like cigarettes and something rotten. $500 tips. Twice. And you only gave me one of them. My mind raced. How did he know about the tips? Was he watching me? Had he paid someone at the restaurant to spy on me? "I needed it for rent," I said. "I'll get you the rest. I just need—" "You need to learn respect." His hand moved to my throat. Not squeezing, not yet, but the threat was clear. "You owe me $2,400, Sophie. And now, because you tried to cheat me, the interest just doubled. You've got 48 hours to bring me $5,000, or I'm going to teach you what happens to girls who think they're clever." He released me and disappeared into the darkness, leaving me gasping against the wall, my throat aching, my entire body shaking. $5,000 in 48 hours. Impossible. I made maybe $200 a night in tips on a good night, and I'd need at least a dozen good nights. I had $847 in my bank account. No family, no friends who had that kind of money. No legal options that wouldn't take weeks I didn't have. I walked to my apartment on numb legs, locked the door, and sat on my bathroom floor for an hour, trying to figure out how to survive. That's when I remembered the business card. I'd thrown it in the trash can beside my locker at work. It might still be there. And even if it wasn't, I'd memorized the number without meaning to, the way you memorize things that feel important, even when you don't want them to be. I didn't call that night. I told myself I wouldn't call at all. Alessandro Moretti was dangerous in ways that made Victor look like an amateur. Whatever he wanted from me, it would cost more than money. But when I showed up for my shift the next evening, and Frank pulled me aside to tell me I'd been requested for a private dining room, I knew the choice had already been made. Alessandro Moretti was waiting in the private room on the restaurant's second floor, a space reserved for proposals and business deals and conversations that couldn't happen in public. He stood when I entered, a gesture of courtesy that felt wrong coming from a man like him. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "I'm working." "Frank gave you the night off. Sit." I sat. Not because he told me to, but because my legs were shaking and I didn't trust them to hold me much longer. He studied me for a long moment, those gray eyes seeing too much. "You look worse than you did yesterday. What happened?" "Nothing." "Sophie?" My name was a warning. "I'm going to ask you one more time, and I want the truth. Are you in trouble?" The word yes stuck in my throat. Saying it out loud would make it real, would make me weak, would give him power over me that I couldn't take back. But I was out of options. "I owe money to a loan shark," I said quietly. $5,000. I have 47 hours to pay him, or he's going to hurt me. Alessandro's expression didn't change, but something happened behind his eyes. Something cold and final. "Name." "What?" "The loan shark's name." "I can't." "You can." He leaned forward. "Give me his name, Sophie, and this problem disappears." I should have been relieved. Instead, I felt ice in my stomach. Because I understood what disappears meant when a man like Alessandro Moretti said it. "I don't want anyone hurt," I said. "Then you should have come to me before it got this far." He pulled out his phone, typed something, and set it aside. "The name." "Victor Kozlov." He nodded once, like I'd confirmed something he already knew. "It's handled. You don't owe him anything anymore." "What does that mean?" "It means exactly what I said." He poured wine into 2 glasses, slid one toward me. "You're under my protection now. Anyone who touches you answers to me." I didn't take the wine. "Why?" "Why what?" "Why do you care? You don't know me. I'm nobody." "You're not nobody." He said it with absolute certainty. "And I care because I've been watching you for 2 weeks, Sophie. I've seen the way you work, the way you treat people, the way you keep going even when you're exhausted. You're strong, you're kind, and you're being crushed by people who don't deserve to breathe the same air as you." His words should have sounded rehearsed, manipulative, but they didn't. They sounded true. and that was more terrifying than any threat. "What do you want from me?" I asked. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I have a son." Of all the things I'd expected him to say, that wasn't one of them. His name is Marco. He's 5 years old. His mother died when he was 2, and since then he's been... Alessandro paused, choosing his words carefully. Difficult. He doesn't speak. He doesn't let anyone close to him. He breaks things, hurts people. I've hired 7 nannies in 3 years. The longest one lasted 4 months. "I'm not a nanny," I said. "No, you're a survivor, like him." He met my eyes. "I watched you with the little girl at table 6 last week, the one having a meltdown because she didn't want to eat her vegetables. You got down on her level. You didn't try to control her, you just understood her, and she calmed down." I remembered that. The girl had been screaming, her parents mortified, other diners complaining. I'd knelt beside her chair and asked her what her favorite color was. We'd talked about colors for 5 minutes, and by the end, she was eating her broccoli because it was green like the forest where fairies lived. "That's different," I said. "Is it?" Alessandro leaned back. "I'm offering you a job, Sophie. Live-in nanny for Marco. Your own room, full salary, benefits. $50,000 a year, plus room and board." $50,000. I made $23,000 at the restaurant, before taxes. This was more money than I'd ever imagined having. "And if I say no?" "Then you say no. Your debt is still handled. You're still under my protection. But I think you'll say yes." "Why?" "Because you need this as much as Marco does." He stood, buttoned his jacket. "Think about it. You have 24 hours to decide." He left me sitting alone in the private dining room with a glass of wine I hadn't touched and a job offer that felt like a trap closing around my throat. I should have said no. Should have run as far from Alessandro Moretti as I could get. But I thought about my apartment with its broken heater and the way I could see my breath on cold mornings. I thought about Victor and the bruises on my arm where he'd grabbed me. I thought about working doubles until I was so tired I couldn't remember my own name and still not having enough money to feel safe. And I thought about a 5-year-old boy who didn't speak, who broke things, who'd lost his mother and didn't know how to survive the grief. I called the number on the business card at 11 p.m. that night. Alessandro answered on the first ring. "Yes or no?" "Yes," I said. "Good. Someone will pick you up tomorrow at 9. He hung up before I could change my mind. The Moretti estate was 45 minutes outside the city, hidden behind stone walls and iron gates that opened silently as the black car approached. The driver, a man named Luca, who hadn't spoken a single word during the entire trip, pulled up to a house that looked more like a museum than a home. 3 stories of stone and glass, surrounded by gardens that probably required a full-time staff to maintain. I'd packed everything I owned into 2 suitcases. Looking at the house, I felt like a stain on expensive fabric. Alessandro met me at the door. In jeans and a black sweater, he looked different than he had at the restaurant. More human. More dangerous. "This is your room," he said, leading me up a curved staircase to the 2nd floor. The bedroom was bigger than my entire apartment had been, with its own bathroom and a window overlooking the gardens. "Marco's room is next door. My room is on the 3rd floor. If you need anything, there's an intercom system." "When do I meet him?" I asked. "Now." He led me to the room next door and opened it without knocking. I don't know what I'd expected. Maybe a normal child's room with toys and books and bright colors. What I saw instead looked like a prison cell that someone had tried to make cheerful. The walls were bare except for padding in several places where something had clearly been thrown hard enough to damage the plaster. There were no toys visible, no books, no personal items at all. And in the corner, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, was Marco. He was small for 5, with his father's dark hair and the kind of pale skin that suggested he didn't go outside much. He was rocking slightly, his arms wrapped around his knees, and he didn't look up when we entered. "Marco," Alessandro said quietly, "this is Sophie. She's going to be staying with us." The boy didn't react, didn't even acknowledge that we were there. I knelt down, not approaching him, just lowering myself to his level. "Hi, Marco. You don't have to talk to me if you don't want to. I just wanted to say hello." Nothing. He kept rocking, his eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. Alessandro's jaw was tight. "He's been like this since this morning. One of the maids tried to give him breakfast and he threw the plate at her, cut her hand." "Did she get too close?" He looked at me sharply. "What?" "Did she get too close to him or try to touch him?" Alessandro was quiet for a moment. "Yes. She tried to feed him." I nodded. "Can you leave us alone?" "I don't think, please." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded and left, closing the door behind him. I stayed where I was, kneeling on the floor several feet from Marco, not speaking, not moving, just breathing, just being present. 5 minutes passed, then 10. My knees started to ache, but I didn't shift position. After 15 minutes, Marco's rocking slowed slightly. After 20, he glanced at me. Just once, so quickly I almost missed it. "I used to rock like that," I said quietly, not looking directly at him. "When I was scared, it helped. Made me feel safer." His rocking stopped completely. "I lived in a lot of different houses when I was growing up," I continued. "Foster homes. Some of them were okay, some of them weren't. And every time I moved to a new one, I'd sit in the corner just like you're sitting now, and I'd rock. And I'd try to figure out if this place was going to hurt me." Marco turned his head slightly toward me. "So I understand if you're scared," I said. "I understand if you don't want to talk to me. I'm new, and new things are scary. But I want you to know something, okay? I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to try to make you do anything you don't want to do. I'm just going to be here, and if you decide you want to talk to me or play with me, or even just sit near me, that's okay. And if you don't, that's okay too." Silence. But he was looking at me now, really looking, with eyes that were too old for his face. "I'm going to sit here for a little while longer," I said. "And then I'm going to go to my room, which is right next door. If you need anything, you can knock on my wall 3 times, and I'll hear you. Okay?" He didn't nod, didn't speak, but something in his expression shifted. I sat with him for another 10 minutes, and then I stood slowly and left the room, closing the door gently behind me. Alessandro was waiting in the hallway. "That's it? You just talked to him?" I introduced myself. He didn't respond. He listened. That's enough for today. I met his eyes. "You can't force connection, Mr. Moretti. You have to let it grow." "Alessandro," he said. "What?" "Call me Alessandro. You live here now. We're not formal." I nodded and went to my room, closing the door and leaning against it, my heart pounding. I'd just committed to living in the house of the most dangerous man in the city, taking care of a traumatized child I didn't know how to help. What the hell had I done? That night, at 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of 3 soft knocks on my wall. I got up immediately, pulled on a robe, and went to Marco's room. The door was unlocked. Inside, he was sitting on his bed, crying silently, tears streaming down his face. "Bad dream?" I asked softly. He nodded. "Can I sit on the floor near your bed?" Another nod. I sat down, my back against the wall, close enough that he could see me, but far enough that I wasn't invading his space. I get bad dreams too sometimes. They're the worst, aren't they? Because even when you wake up, you still feel scared. He was watching me, his small hands clutching his blanket. "Do you want me to stay until you fall back asleep?" He nodded again, and something in my chest cracked open. I stayed on that floor for 2 hours, until his breathing evened out and he slept. Then I crept back to my room and lay awake until dawn, wondering if I'd just made a promise I couldn't keep. The next 3 weeks were the hardest of my life. Marco didn't speak. He barely ate. He broke things when he got overwhelmed, plates, glasses, once an entire lamp. But he never broke things near me. And every night, at some point between midnight and dawn, there would be 3 knocks on my wall. I always came. I always sat on his floor. And slowly, incrementally, he started to let me closer. By the end of the first week, I could sit on the edge of his bed. By the end of the second, he let me hold his hand while he fell asleep. By the end of the third, he spoke his first words to me. "Stay." Just that. One word, whispered so quietly I almost missed it. "I'm staying," I promised. "I'm not going anywhere." Alessandro watched all of this from a distance. He worked long hours, disappeared for days at a time. But when he was home, he'd find excuses to check on us, to see Marco eating breakfast without throwing his plate, to hear him laugh, actually laugh at something I'd said, to watch us reading together in the library, Marco's small body tucked against my side. "You're a miracle," Alessandro said to me one night after I'd put Marco to bed. We were in the kitchen. I was making tea, and he'd appeared silently the way he always did, like he was made of shadows. "I'm not a miracle. I'm just patient." "No." He stepped closer, and I could smell his cologne, something expensive and dark. "You're changing him. Changing this house. Changing..." He didn't finish the sentence. "Changing what?" I asked. "Me," he said quietly. I should have stepped back. Should have maintained the professional distance that was supposed to exist between an employer and employee. But I didn't. I stood there holding my mug of tea, looking up at him, and seeing something in his eyes that made my breath catch. "Alessandro." "I know," he said. "I know this is complicated. I know you work for me. I know I'm not a good man, Sophie. I've done things that would make you run if you knew about them. But when I'm near you, I want to be better. You make me want to be the kind of man who deserves to be in the same room as you." "You're Marco's father," I said, because I needed to say something, needed to put words between us before I did something stupid. "You're already in the same room as me." "That's not what I mean." "I know what you mean." "Then why are you still standing here?" It was a good question. I didn't have a good answer. The moment stretched between us, taut and fragile, and then Marco's voice called from upstairs. "Sophie?" The spell broke. I set down my tea and went to him, and when I looked back, Alessandro was gone. That was 3 weeks ago. Now, tonight, everything has fallen apart. Alessandro asked me to join him and Marco for dinner at Marcello's. "I want Marco to see where we met," he said. "I want him to have a normal experience, a family dinner." I should have said no. Should have known that taking a traumatized 5-year-old to a crowded restaurant was asking for disaster. But Marco had been doing so well. He'd started speaking in full sentences. He'd been eating regularly. He'd even smiled at his father last week, the first time Alessandro had seen his son smile in over a year. So I said yes. We arrived at Marcello's at 6 p.m., early enough that the dinner rush hadn't started yet. Frank nearly fell over himself seating us, giving Alessandro the best table in the house, the one by the window with a view of the city lights. Marco sat between Alessandro and me, looking around with wide eyes. There were too many people, too many sounds, too many smells, and I could see him starting to get overwhelmed. "Marco," I said quietly, taking his hand under the table. "Remember what we practiced? When things feel like too much, we breathe. Can you breathe with me?" He nodded, and we breathed together, slow and steady, and the tension in his small body eased slightly. Alessandro was watching us with an expression I couldn't read. The waiter came. We ordered. Marco asked for spaghetti, which felt like a victory because he was asking for something he wanted instead of just accepting whatever was given to him. And then Viktor Kozlov walked into the restaurant. I saw him before he saw me. He was with 2 other men, both of them wearing suits that didn't quite fit, trying to look like they belonged in a place like this. My entire body went cold. Alessandro noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," I said, but my voice shook. "Sophie." Victor's eyes found me across the restaurant. His expression changed, surprise shifting to something ugly and calculating. He said something to his companions and started walking toward our table. "Alessandro," I said urgently. "That's Victor, the loan shark. I thought you said it was handled." Alessandro's expression went absolutely flat. Not angry, not concerned, just empty. And that emptiness was more terrifying than any rage. "It was handled. He was supposed to be in the hospital." "He looks pretty healthy to me." Victor reached our table. He was smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Sophie, what a surprise. I heard you'd moved up in the world, but I didn't believe it until now." "Leave," Alessandro said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Victor's smile widened. "And you must be the famous Alessandro Moretti. I've heard so much about you. Though I have to say, I'm surprised you'd involve yourself in Sophie's debts. She still owes me $5,000, you know. With interest, it's probably closer to 8 now." "She owes you nothing." "That's not how I see it." Victor's eyes moved to Marco, who was shrinking into his chair, his hand gripping mine so tightly it hurt. "Cute kid. Yours?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You need to leave," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Now." "Or what? Your boyfriend here is going to threaten me? I don't scare easily, Sophie, and I always collect what I'm owed." Marco made a small sound, something between a whimper and a gasp. His breathing was getting faster, his whole body starting to shake. I recognized the signs. He was about to have a meltdown, the kind that would be violent and public and undo weeks of progress. "Marco," I said softly, turning away from Victor. "Look at me, sweetheart. Just look at me." But it was too late. Marco's eyes were unfocused, his breathing rapid and shallow. He was gone, lost in whatever hell his trauma had dragged him into, and I knew what was coming next. He screamed. Not a child's tantrum scream, a sound of pure, primal terror that cut through every conversation in the restaurant. People turned to stare. Frank started hurrying over. And Marco started grabbing things, silverware, plates, glasses, and throwing them. A fork hit Victor in the chest. A glass shattered against the wall. A plate smashed on the floor. "Jesus Christ," Victor said, stepping back. "What's wrong with him?" Alessandro stood, and for a moment I thought he was going to kill Victor right there in the middle of the restaurant. But instead, he turned to Marco, reaching for his son, trying to calm him. Marco bit him, drew blood, then scrambled out of his chair and ran, darting between tables, heading for the kitchen. "Marco!" I was up and running before I consciously decided to move, chasing after him, my heart in my throat. He made it to the kitchen before I caught him. He was cornered near the industrial dishwasher, his back against the wall, his eyes wild and unseeing. The kitchen staff had stopped working, everyone staring at the screaming child who'd invaded their space. I held up my hand to them. "Give us space, please." They backed away slowly, and I turned to Marco. "Marco," I said, not approaching, just standing there. "I know you're scared. I know this is too much. But I need you to hear my voice, okay? I need you to come back to me." He kept screaming, his small hands clenched into fists. I did the only thing I could think of. I started singing. It was a lullaby my foster mother had sung to me when I was 6, during the one good placement I'd had before everything fell apart. I didn't remember all the words, but I remembered the melody, soft and slow and safe. Marco's screaming faltered. I kept singing, lowering myself to the floor, making myself small and non-threatening. His breathing started to slow. I held out my hand, palm up, not reaching for him, just offering. And after a moment that felt like an eternity, he took it. He collapsed into my arms, sobbing, his small body shaking with the force of his fear. I held him and rocked him and kept singing until the sobs turned to hiccups and then to silence. "I'm sorry," he whispered against my shoulder. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." "You have nothing to be sorry for," I told him. "You got scared. That's okay. Being scared is okay." I broke things. Things can be replaced. You can't. He pulled back to look at me, his face wet with tears. "You're not going to leave?" "Never. I promised you, remember? I'm not going anywhere." "Even though I'm bad?" My heart shattered. "Marco, you're not bad. You're hurt. There's a difference." Alessandro appeared in the kitchen doorway. He'd dealt with Victor, I didn't want to know how, and now he was staring at us with an expression of absolute devastation. "Is he okay?" Alessandro asked. "He will be." I stood, lifting Marco with me. He wrapped his legs around my waist and buried his face in my neck. "We need to go home." "Sophie, home, Alessandro. Now." He nodded and led us out through the back entrance, avoiding the dining room and the stairs and the whispers. Luca was waiting with the car, and we drove back to the estate in silence, Marco falling asleep in my arms. I carried him up to his room and tucked him into bed. He didn't let go of my hand, so I lay down beside him, on top of the covers, and stayed there until I was sure he was deeply asleep. When I finally extracted myself and went downstairs, Alessandro was in his study, standing by the window, his back to the door. I failed him. he said without turning around. I pushed too hard. I wanted so badly for him to be normal that I put him in a situation he couldn't handle. He's 5 years old and he's been through hell, I said. He's never going to be normal. But that doesn't mean he can't be happy. How do you know that? Because I'm not normal either. And you made me happy. He turned around then, his gray eyes intense. Sophie, don't. I held up my hand. Don't say whatever you're about to say. Not tonight. Tonight, I need to be Marco's nanny, not whatever else this is becoming. And tomorrow? Tomorrow, we figure out how to help your son feel safe. That's all that matters. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled me into his arms. Not kissing me, not trying to take anything, just holding me like I was the only solid thing in a world that was falling apart. I let him. God help me, I let him, because I needed it as much as he did. I'm falling in love with you, he said against my hair. I know I shouldn't. I know it's complicated and dangerous and probably the worst decision I could make. But I am. I'm falling in love with you, Sophie Chen, and I don't know how to stop. I should have pulled away. Should have reminded him about professional boundaries and power dynamics and all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Instead, I said, then don't stop. He pulled back to look at me, his hands framing my face. What? Don't stop, because I'm falling too, and I'm tired of pretending I'm not. He kissed me then, and it felt like coming home to a place I'd never been, like safety and danger all mixed together, like the beginning of something that would either save us or destroy us, and I couldn't bring myself to care which. When we finally broke apart, he pressed his forehead to mine. I need to tell you something about Victor. Did you kill him? No. But I made it very clear what would happen if he ever came near you or Marco again. He won't be a problem. What did you do? Do you really want to know? I thought about it. About the man I'd been afraid of for months, who'd threatened me and hurt me and made me feel powerless. About the fact that he'd triggered Marco's meltdown and undone weeks of careful progress. No, I said. I don't want to know. I just want him gone. He's gone. I nodded and stepped back, putting space between us because if I didn't, I was going to do something stupid like ask him to come to my room. I should check on Marco, I said. Sophie. I stopped at the door. Thank you, he said, for saving my son, for saving me. You're welcome. I went upstairs and slipped back into Marco's room. He was still sleeping, his small face peaceful in the moonlight coming through the window. I sat on the floor beside his bed, my back against the wall, and watched him breathe. This broken little boy who'd been through hell. This man who commanded an empire but couldn't connect with his own son. This life I'd stumbled into that felt like a dream and a nightmare all tangled together. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Didn't know if I could really help Marco heal, or if Alessandro and I had any chance of building something real in the middle of all this chaos. But for the first time in my life, I had something worth fighting for, something worth staying for. And that was enough. 3 months later, on a Saturday morning in February, I woke to sunlight streaming through my window and the sound of laughter. I got up and followed the sound downstairs to the kitchen, where Alessandro was attempting to make pancakes while Marco sat on the counter, offering completely unhelpful advice. You're burning them, Marco announced. I am not burning them. This is called golden brown. That's called black. You're fired as my sous chef. You can't fire me. I'm your son. Alessandro looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. His face transformed, that rare, genuine smile that he only showed when he thought no one was watching. "We're making breakfast," he said. "Or attempting to." "I can see that." I walked over and took the spatula from his hand. "Let me help before you burn the house down." Marco giggled. Actually giggled. The sound still surprised me every time I heard it. "Sophie's better at this than you, Dad." Dad. He'd started calling Alessandro that 2 weeks ago, tentatively at first, then with increasing confidence. Every time he said it, Alessandro's eyes got suspiciously bright. "Everyone's better at this than me," Alessandro admitted. "I have many skills. Cooking is not one of them." "What are your skills?" Marco asked. Alessandro and I exchanged a glance. How do you explain to a 5-year-old that his father's skills include things like strategic intimidation and running a criminal empire? "I'm very good at protecting the people I love," Alessandro said finally. "Like me and Sophie?" "Exactly like you and Sophie." Marco seemed satisfied with this answer. He went back to swinging his legs and chattering about the cartoon he'd watched that morning, a running commentary that would have been impossible to imagine 3 months ago. We ate breakfast together, the 3 of us, in the kitchen filled with morning light. It was ordinary, domestic, perfect. After breakfast, Marco went to play in the garden, actually play, running around instead of sitting in corners, and Alessandro pulled me aside. "I have something for you," he said. He handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for $50,000. "What is this?" I asked. "Your salary for the year." "Alessandro, I've only been here for 4 months." "I know. Consider the rest a bonus for giving me my son back." I tried to hand it back. "I can't accept this." "You can. You will." He closed my fingers around the envelope. "Sophie, you changed everything. Marco's talking. He's laughing. He's healing. And I'm—" He paused. "I'm different too. Better. Because of you. I didn't do anything special. I just cared about him. That's everything." He cupped my face in his hands. "You're everything." He kissed me, soft and sweet, and I let myself sink into it, into him, into this life we were building together. When we broke apart, Marco was standing in the doorway, grinning. "Are you guys going to get married?" Alessandro and I both froze. "Because if you are, I want to be in the wedding," Marco continued. "And I want a dog. Can we get a dog?" "We're not," I started. "Yes," Alessandro said. I looked at him. "Yes to the wedding, or yes to the dog?" "Both." My heart stopped. "Alessandro, I love you, Sophie Chen. I've loved you since the first night I walked into that restaurant and saw you smiling even though you were drowning. I want to marry you. I want to build a life with you. I want you to be Marco's mother officially, not just in practice. Say yes." It was insane. We'd known each other for 4 months. We'd only been together for 3. There were 1,000 reasons to say no. But when I looked at Marco, bouncing excitedly in the doorway, and then at Alessandro with his gray eyes full of hope and vulnerability, I couldn't think of a single one. "Yes," I said. "Yes to all of it." Marco whooped and ran over to hug us both, and Alessandro lifted him up, pulling me close with his other arm, and we stood there in the kitchen, the 3 of us, holding each other. A family. Not by blood, but by choice, by love, by the determination to heal together. 6 months after that, we got married in the garden of the estate, with Marco as the ring bearer and exactly 3 guests: Luca, Frank, and the elderly neighbor who'd been kind to me when I lived in my terrible apartment. It wasn't a Mafia wedding with hundreds of guests and political alliances. It was small and private and perfect. Marco gave a speech that made everyone cry. "Sophie saved me and Dad," he said, his 7-year-old voice serious. "She taught us how to be a family, and also she makes really good pancakes." Alessandro kissed me in front of our tiny audience, and I kissed him back, and when we broke apart, Marco was standing between us, holding both our hands. "Can we get the dog now?" he asked. We got the dog. A golden retriever puppy that Marco named Pancake, because of course he did. And we lived. Not happily ever after, because life isn't a fairy tale. We had hard days. Marco had setbacks. Alessandro's work sometimes brought darkness to our door, but we faced it together, and that made all the difference. 5 years later, I stood in the kitchen of our home, because it stopped being Alessandro's estate and became ours the day I said yes, making breakfast while Marco helped his little sister with her homework and Alessandro read the newspaper. Ordinary, domestic, perfect. Marco, now 12, looked up from the math problem he was explaining. "Mom, tell Sophia that I'm right about fractions." Mom. He'd started calling me that a year after the wedding, shyly at first, then with increasing confidence. It still made my chest tight with emotion every time. "You're right about fractions," I confirmed. "See?" Marco told his sister. "Mom knows everything." Alessandro caught my eye over the newspaper and smiled. That private smile that was just for me. The one that said, "I love you," and "thank you," and "I can't believe this is real," all at once. I smiled back. Because this was real. This family we'd built from broken pieces. This love we'd chosen despite every reason not to. This life we'd fought for. And it was worth everything. They say broken people can't be fixed. They say trauma leaves scars that never heal. They say that people like Alessandro and me from such different worlds could never work. They're wrong. Because we did heal. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Enough to love. Enough to build something beautiful from the ruins of what we'd been. And in the end, that's all anyone can ask for. To be seen. To be chosen. To be loved despite and because of all the broken pieces. That's what we gave each other, Alessandro, Marco, and me. And that's what saved us all.